Charli D'Amelio, Addison Rae, Zach King, Bella Poarch, and MrBeast. Right now, these social media stars are the most popular celebrities in the world. They use TikTok to provide us endless hours of seemingly harmless bite-sized entertainment, and they're making an insane living doing so. But what if I told you that these people were unknowingly involved in one of the most sinister geopolitical conspiracies the world has ever seen? Let me explain. It's no secret that TikTok is currently the driving force behind popular culture in the West. Every popularized song, meme, style, trend, development, and slang can be traced back to TikTok in some shape or form, because everyone you know is consuming its content. With all other social media platforms that were once the cusp of every trend and development in internet culture have now seemingly fallen behind the curve, and TikTok has taken the mantle, amassing over 1 billion current active users around the world, 80 million of which are in the United States alone. And with its growing hold over Generation Z in particular, it might be obvious why TikTok has grown to be a trend-setting powerhouse. And when you think about it, the youth are really the arbiters of popular culture, and so by providing a platform in which the youth can dictate content rapidly and instantaneously means the said platform now dictates popular culture. And although it's just one country, popular culture in the United States is extremely important. It's a pace setter for the Western world. What becomes popular in the United States quickly becomes popular everywhere else. And this is what makes TikTok and its most followed individuals extremely powerful, with the app mixing and homogenizing the world's entire culture. This process will only accelerate, as the average TikTok user spends over an hour and a half on the app every single day, and 60% of TikTok users are from Generation Z. And as I'm sure you're all aware, TikTok has bled into everyday life on such an unprecedented scale, meaning that by now it has an immeasurable impact on people's culture and their personal lives. Now at first glance, popular TikTokers like MrBeast, Addison Rae, Zach King are just simply the youth driving culture as they always have, making fun, entertaining videos to be consumed and shared by the masses, creating trends that attract existing celebrities and people of older generations who fear being left out or left behind. However, what if I told you that it's not exactly Gen Z or influencers who are at the wheel driving popular culture at all, and maybe instead the wheel is being tightly gripped by the white-knuckled hands of a fascist government in a country that is one of the greatest threats to the United States? To understand what I mean by this, we first need to understand how TikTok came to be. Q ByteDance. Founded in 2012 by Zhang Yiming, the Beijing tech company ByteDance began working on an algorithm that would change the world. And this algorithm was perfectly designed to addict its users by feeding them short-form content rapidly, analyzing their viewing habits, and carefully curating their intake to keep them consuming for as long as possible. After all, in the modern world, attention equals currency. But how is this seemingly random Chinese company going to implement the world's most advanced algorithm that the world has ever seen? Well, this started in 2017, when ByteDance acquired the Shanghai-based social media startup Musical.ly. Through Musical.ly's app, users could create 15-second to 1-minute music videos with their lip-sync to popular songs and interacted with their communities. And ByteDance saw the value in combining this with the scroll-focused interface of their existing property Flipagram to create what we now know as TikTok. ByteDance had already seen the success of Vine, and they understood the power of these bite-sized videos. And by mixing all of these apps together, ByteDance was developing the perfect algorithm. And with this user-generated content now being rapidly fed in scrollable bite-sized pieces to the masses, TikTok became the perfect avenue for aspiring creators and influencers, providing anyone anywhere the opportunity to go viral like no one has ever seen. ByteDance tested out the formula in China first, attracting both content consumers and content creators in the span of just a couple of months, and soon the app took over the entirety of China. And that is when the Chinese government saw an incredible opportunity. But it's important you understand who the Chinese government really is. The Chinese Communist Party, or otherwise known as the CCP, has governed China since 1949, rising to power under leader Mao Zedong after a brutally fought civil war. Their mastery of the use of propaganda tactics to capture the minds of the people proved to be one of the most critical aspects to their success, with Mao Zedong heavily emphasizing the importance of controlling the culture to control the population. In his Great Cultural Revolution, Mao specifically focused his propaganda on certain idols, people who stood as examples of socialist heroes. Lei Feng and Dong Kangru were model soldiers who lived and died for their devotion to the state and its leader. Alongside these idols came mass censorship, state-controlled media, and the creation of imperialist enemies in the West. And since Mao, the CCP has always cracked down on liberalization, returning to the traditional ways of thought control and censorship. And with that, the CCP employed a variety of propaganda techniques, including control of the media, and more specifically, the construction of role models to be emulated by the Chinese youth. Now, it's very important to remember this point later on. Anyway, fast forward to the current day, where the CCP has become one of the most successful dictatorships the world has ever seen, standing as the second largest political party in the world, with more than 96 million members under current leader Xi Jinping. His totalitarian government has sought to control every aspect of modern life. First, they offer the carrot. The impoverished masses are offered a promise they can escape poverty and hardship if they work just hard enough for the state. Cut-through state exams with incredibly high fail rates ensure this dream only becomes true for a few, and in return for this opportunity, citizens are then expected to swallow the propaganda propaganda, accept the status quo, and stay out of the way of the ruling party, which is why every part of communist Chinese culture is so strictly controlled to keep this narrative going. Social media, television, the news, entertainment, all of it is passed through the CCP's great filter. If you don't swallow the propaganda and play along, you end up in jail, or in one of China's re-education camps. Mao could only have dreamed of the control that Xi Jinping now has over his country, and the total control of culture that Mao Zedong once stressed so heavily is still so strong. With extreme surveillance monitoring and data gathering to create profiles on citizens, the CCP can then assign a social credit score to each individual. This allows them to do two things. It incentivizes their citizens to behave and effectively predicts the future in regards to those who will likely disobey. The other major facet of the CCP's control is enforced legislation that limits the influence of foreign media and access to the internet. Through these methods, the Chinese government is creating citizens that are both more efficient economically and more obedient politically than those of foreign nations, consolidating its position as the world's global superpower. And this leads on to something very important. When Xi Jinping was first elected in 2012, he ran on the promise of the Chinese dream, described as the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation by the 100th anniversary of when the CCP was founded, 2049. And this 2049 plan hinges on a series of 5-year economic plans to ensure China will become the dominant global superpower. But to achieve such heights globally, Xi Jinping and the CCP would have to find a way to not only strengthen its own position, but weaken the position of competing nations. And the way to do this would be to enact the same sort of cultural control they have achieved within China over the rest of the world. And so with this context out of the way, it becomes very clear the value of TikTok, an app that is acutely engineered for growth and popularity, with one of the most advanced algorithms the world has ever seen that is constantly collecting data on the global population. And so it shouldn't be surprised to find out that the Chinese government always had a plan for ByteDance and TikTok. In the short term, the app would be a tool to collect data on foreign citizens, building profiles around them that mirror the existing social credit scores within China, and in the long term, it would become key to infiltrating popular culture around the world. But you may be thinking, well, a government making efforts to influence the culture of foreign nations really isn't anything new. And to be fair, this is a relatively common practice. Perhaps the most obvious examples of this are when governments with countless human rights violations use investment groups to buy controlling stakes in sport. When countries like Qatar or the United Arab Emirates buy their way into a European football club, they will then elevate the success and status of that club through excessive spending. And by doing this, they legitimize these countries, it normalizes these kingdoms, and creates a fan base that is in theory loyal to defending these countries. However, this approach does backfire. It's often too obvious. By making such a public splash on the world stage through investment, you're opening yourself up to widespread critique, as sports is a heavily scrutinized and discussed industry around the world. And the Chinese Communist Party actually knows this, which is why in 2017, coincidentally when TikTok was first launched, that the CCP forced Chinese businesses to sell their ownership stakes in European football clubs, citing that these clubs offer nothing in return for their investment. Instead, the CCP prefers a more subtle approach to foreign public relations. For years now, they've been using their control over media and technology companies through things like Tencent and Huawei to get fingers in the pie of Western culture. And this is no secret. Almost all world governments know about this, as the Shenzhen-based company Tencent is one of the highest grossing media companies in the world, with investments in major cultural pillars such as the NBA, Reddit, Spotify, Epic Games, and Activision Blizzard. And the Chinese government-run Tencent has used these ties to silence and limit the reach of discourse surrounding the genocide being carried out by the Chinese state, censoring any information about the Muslim Uyghur population being sent to concentration camps and the resulting protests in Beijing. And Huawei's no better. Documents have confirmed around the world that their consumer and business-facing surveillance products have been providing information to the Chinese government on an unprecedented level. And this is what's so effective about Chinese propaganda, because coming back to the sports example, Qatar spent hundreds of billions on their propaganda World Cup, only to see some of their image abroad worsen considerably. However, with China, they've been able to stay under the radar and quietly buy influence in other areas, and have seen all the benefits with very few drawbacks compared to countries like Qatar, and they very effectively use Tencent to suppress any foreign support for Hong Kong. In fact, there's a very good reason you've probably never heard of this. For example, in 2019, the president of the Philadelphia 76ers spoke out against China, and so Tencent stopped airing their games, and the club saw a significant portion of their revenue disappear, and were forced to make a public apology. And there's just so many countless instances of this I could go on forever, but all of these instances portray a much grander plan. By buying these investments in Western companies, China has suddenly gained the ability to sway public opinion and censor critics abroad. The solution here seems obvious, and you may be wondering why the Western world hasn't sought to limit China's ability to interfere with their media and technology infrastructure, in the same way they've done for other hostile governments such as North Korea's or Russia's. And the answer becomes clear when you take a closer look at the relationship China has cultivated with the Western world. You see, China has done a very effective job at projecting the image of being a somewhat liberalized nation to the eyes of the Western world. Furthermore, TikTok is reportedly willing to share more of its algorithm to avoid being banned in US states. According to this article published by the Wall Street Journal, TikTok tries to win allies in the US with more transparency in response to the ban on US government-issued devices. In the new proposed arrangement, US third-party monitors would check for video recommendation algorithms to detect whether it has been manipulated or if the Chinese government or other foreign actors have had access. And speaking of propaganda and media censorship, let's take a look at how this is being covered by other media outlets by using ground news, which I use to research topics like this. It's interesting to see that the Wall Street Journal was the first article to pick up the story, and that most of the sources reporting on it are from the US. We can see the Washington Examiner headlines the story as TikTok opening nearly $1.5 billion proposal to accommodate US regulators. The Evening Standard, as TikTok offers to share algorithm details in a bid to swerve US ban, and the New York Post. TikTok offers to have third-party monitoring if China spies on US users. It's also interesting to see that all of these sources are from right-leaning outlets, making the story a huge blind spot for readers reading left-leaning outlets, and that of these sources, 33% are owned by media conglomerates. And today you can check out the story at ground.news/moon to read more about it and subscribe to see all the features that I use to avoid bias in the media. Comparing the language used in each headline, we can get an idea of how language in the media can be used to shape our understanding of a story, and from this that the Chinese company is keeping in line with portraying an image of alliance to keep them from getting banned in the US. Since the 70s, the CCP's leaders have maintained appearances and played nice with the leaders of global superpowers, all in an effort to ensure national security and economic growth. And this has allowed the public to see their leaders shaking hands with the likes of Mao Zedong or sharing a drink with Xi Jinping, and it humanizes the CCP. China wasn't seen as unfavorable by a majority of Americans until recently in 2018, and this is exactly the same time that TikTok exploded in the US market. And whether this happened by coincidence or planning, TikTok's rise perfectly coincided with the beginning of the second stage of China's foreign policy, aggression. After years of making friends, China has also been making deals. Along with their companies buying parts of the Western economy, China has also moved to consolidate power over global trade itself. By buying out around 100 ports in 60 different countries, China has taken its grip on vital global infrastructure. In fact, by this point, China's almost colonized Africa. But then the trade wars began, and relations severely worsened between the two global superpowers. And that's when propaganda in China started to worsen towards the US, with China now framing the West as an open enemy. But during this time, the West seemingly had much bigger things to worry about. The Western world was focused on Russia and the Middle East, all while the Chinese government was positioning itself perfectly. But then what was this for exactly? And what does the Chinese government have to gain from their publicity efforts? Well, it's not just freedom to exert economic or cultural influence. Those are just a means to an end. So then what's the end? Well, the end goal is the scariest part of all of this. The truth is that right now, China is preparing for war. China has a defense budget of over $270 billion US, and that number is steadily increasing with each year, with the Chinese government reportedly restructuring and ramping up their recruitment, promotion, and pay incentives for military personnel. There's also news of the Chinese military making lucrative offers to former officers of the British Air Force, all in an effort to bolster training methods. And although China hasn't yet initiated conflict, all signs point to it being a matter of time. I mean, you don't have to look very far into this to realize that the Chinese government has set their sights on Taiwan. There's a reason the Chinese government is threatening use of force if a peaceful consolidation of the two nations cannot be achieved. And to demonstrate this, China has been practicing invading. They've literally held combat drills in the air and sea around Taiwan 2 times in the past month, preparing to storm the presidential building in Taiwan, which China claims this is all to resolutely counter provocative actions of external forces and Taiwan independent separatist forces. But again, why is China doing this? What is the end goal here? Why do they want to absorb Taiwan? Well, there are many reasons, but one stands out in particular, and that being trade, one of the key pillars behind China's global dominance. Because Taiwan's GDP was estimated to now be over $800 billion in 2022, with its two largest export partners being China and the US. This is not to mention the increasing global demand for advanced semiconductors, one of the most vital parts of the whole world's technology industry. Without this, you won't have your laptops, phones. All of the world's technological infrastructure relies on this. And it turns out that Taiwan is home to 90% of semiconductors. And not to mention, it's been reported that nearly half the demand for these semiconductors is from the United States. Not only this, but Taiwan was always a part of China's 2049 plan. They were never supposed to break away from China. It's been a stain on the CCP's rule since their independence. All Chinese leaders have set their eyes on reunifying with Taiwan, and it's just a matter of time until this happens. China is also facing a crisis in the country. People are protesting the CCP's authoritarian regime. They're sick of the lockdowns, they're sick of the surveillance, and China needs a distraction right now. And what better time than when the West is distracted by Ukraine? And so it should be clear the very real possibility of a war between China and Taiwan, which would inevitably involve the United States. And in this case, although the United States has no official diplomatic duty to help Taiwan, it would very much be to their advantage. In fact, this is pivotal. If they don't do this, the United States is ceding all their power to China. And so with this in mind, you start to understand why the Chinese government cares so much about TikTok. It's the most dominant social media platform in the United States, and by having full control of TikTok, this will control the narrative behind any future tensions between the two countries. Because more and more we find out that social media has the ultimate power to influence political opinion, and this power has been amplified in the United States during recent years. I mean, skepticism of traditional media sources has reached an all-time high, and this is for a very good reason. Mainstream news has let the mask slip in recent years, and it's become increasingly clear that the sources who were once most trusted by society simply exist as propaganda outlets for billionaires, or to increase the profits of the investors that they represent. Noam Chomsky and endless academics have talked about this. The traditional news media in America bends facts in the name of entertainment, capitalizing off of fear and creating villains and strawmen amongst the population that they're meant to inform. But the truth is, this has left a vacuum for truth. Misinformation is everywhere, and social media simply amplifies it and makes it more difficult to pass through. And this turns into people blindly trusting and repeating this misinformation, which can make it seem more credible and result in online echo chambers, which increase division, create siege mentality, and heightens the toxic culture war we've been stuck in. And these social media echo chambers lead to what we saw in 2020, with massive Black Lives Matter protests ravaging America, and the US Capitol riots that threaten American democracy as we know it. But it's in the search for truth that we realize that we've been taken advantage of. Foreign agents all around the world are busy licking their lips through their direct interference in democracy and by pushing agendas in the online space, with foreign dictators and autocracies banning all these social media sites and using them against the West. And whilst the summit might have seemed like Russia was the first regime to take advantage of this, China has been perfecting social media and internet manipulation for years, and the sinister tactics they've used to control their own segregated internet can easily be used abroad. All they needed was control of an online platform, and with its insane growth, TikTok is uniquely positioned to be the most powerful social media platform in the United States and across the world for the foreseeable future. And not only because of its growth either, TikTok's algorithm is perfectly designed to have these snowballing effects I mentioned. TikTok platforms certain people with ideas deemed popular enough and allows them to gain momentum very quickly. We trust TikTok to feed us content that is similar to our interests, even though there's no authority making sure it does so. I mean, any TikTok user knows by now that the app is designed to fill hours upon hours of people's daily lives, which inevitably causes them to conflate what they see with their actual environment. And with this in mind, the capacity for users to be psychologically manipulated and ideologically driven on TikTok seems to be a feature and not a bug. And the alarming fact is that ByteDance, and by proxy the Chinese government, controls this algorithm entirely. They can create inputs that promote certain videos and limit the reach of others. And these algorithm changes can be subtle, happening overnight and without any sort of official notice. And everybody outside of ByteDance, even creators who have seemingly mastered this platform, are then in the dark about how exactly this algorithm works. And this gives the company free license to steer users down certain paths that benefit them and their associates. And let's not forget a point made earlier in the video. TikTok is particularly appealing to a younger, more impressionable audience. You may be thinking a possible negative effect on children and teenagers is a flaw of the internet in general and not really specific to TikTok, but TikTok is designed with a pillar of the CCP's original propaganda philosophy in mind, the construction of role models. There's a reason why China's version of TikTok, Douyin, is so different from the version they send to the rest of the world. If you're a child under the age of 14 in China, Douyin shows you the educational videos like science experiments and museum exhibits, with the rest of Chinese TikTok showing hardworking everyday civilians helping their country and sacrificing for the greater communist good. And yet if you're that same child in the United States, TikTok shows you sex, vandalism, crime, social disruption, and other dopamine-satisfying degenerate clips. And when preteens in the US and China were surveyed, asking what is the most aspirational career they hope to achieve, the #1 answer in the US was to be a social media influencer, while in China, it was to be an astronaut. Which is why it's clear that Mao's old method of creating idols has been turned on its head and used as a weapon.
And they make their domestic version a spinach version of TikTok. while they ship the opium version to the rest of the world.
What China uses to unify their population culturally is now being used to sow dissent and weaken the population of the West. And it's evident that the role models that Generation Z is exposed to almost always come from TikTok. But it's not just the idea that these TikTokers have social influence that makes them so useful to the CCP, it's the idea that they have economic influence. In just over 4 years since its launch in the United States, TikTok has become its own industry. Individuals are making their entire incomes on TikTok. Mainstream celebrities are now using TikTok to maintain relevancy and revive their careers. Major companies are now hiring entire teams of people solely dedicated to TikTok, all in order to market their products. And the beauty of TikTok for the CCP is that when the most powerful people in Western society are chasing views on an app that they control, they then control these people. So if people's livelihoods depend directly or even indirectly on how many views they mass on TikTok, they'll create whatever content the algorithm needs them to create. And because of this, the CCP no longer has to buy social media companies. They don't need to buy sports teams. They don't need to be so overt with their propaganda, as they have all the world's most powerful and most influential people in their pocket. And by doing this, they can influence discourse surrounding issues involving China, easily turning a dial to amplify certain voices while silencing others. And those silenced voices will either have to fall in line or risk losing their incomes or career.
我爱更尊重中国更中国人，我狠狠抱歉对我的错误。
Scrolling through your feed in real time, it may feel like a reach to draw a conclusion that your favorite TikTokers are currently contributing to the propaganda machine of a corrupt foreign government. And that's because they're not, at least not yet. The videos on TikTok for the most part are entertaining, harmless and fun. Your favorite TikTokers probably provide you with comedy, art, knowledge, and community at no monetary cost to you. And in turn, they get a platform, an outlet and a fulfilling career. So it seems like a win-win. And on the surface, it seems like there's very little reason to distrust the app. But this iteration of TikTok is the before picture of the Trojan horse. The global version of TikTok being consumed outside of China is currently operating within a single goal in mind. The CCP is playing a long-term game, and to acquire the kind of foothold that will aid them in their goals as being a dominant global superpower, they need users, they need money, they need trust, and they need to maximize its addictiveness. So far it's working incredibly. In just a couple of years, over 20% of all internet users in the world are now using TikTok on a regular basis, and this percentage is increasing with no signs of slowing down. At this rate, TikTok has the potential to be the ultimate global sleeper agent for the CCP, and almost no one's doing anything about this. And the concern shouldn't be in response to what the CCP and ByteDance are doing with TikTok at the moment. The concern should be what they can do. You see, we've already established that in the increasingly likely event that China invades Taiwan, the United States will be forced to take the side of Taiwan in order to protect their own trade interests and their geopolitical positioning. But this isn't a certainty. Whilst the war in Ukraine has definitely given China pause for thought, they haven't reduced their aggression at all. Biden has promised that the US would defend Taiwan.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
Although it still does seem like China will try their luck, whilst the West is distracted by Ukraine, and it's also the perfect opportunity to regain their own population's trust in the CCP. But in many ways, the war has already started. TikTok and China's other technological expansions are the first move in a growing technological war. Although neither side wants a full-scale physical war, the best wars are thought through the mind. And that's why with TikTok, China might have the perfect way of getting what they want. Using TikTok's power and influence over culture, China could very easily push an anti-war agenda on the site. They could sow doubt online about the true nature of the war, they could muddy the water with misinformation, and influence high-level content creators to speak out against US intervention. I mean, China's already done this with Tibet. They've silenced all the outcries for Tibetan independence. They silenced all the Hong Kong protesters. They silenced all the backlash against the Uyghur genocide in China. This is why you don't hear about these massive issues in the world that relate to China, because China controls the algorithm. Just like everything else today, a war to defend Taiwan would become an issue along political lines. Although one of the only issues that Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives have been united on is the growing threat of China. Although this also could change. TikTok could be used to interfere and delay an organized defense of Taiwan, or even stop foreign interference completely, and this is just one of the issues that China would love to change the public's mind on. With TikTok, the CCP will be able to sweep their atrocities under the rug and further expand their borders and damage the social fabric of their enemies. This is why the United States government now sees TikTok as such a major threat, and it's not just one side of the US political geopolitical dichotomy either. Current US President Joe Biden has declared his intention to ban TikTok in the United States for good, and has already made headway in banning the use of the app on government devices at the federal and state level. The Biden administration also explicitly cites the known data and security risks surrounding ByteDance as the main driving force behind their push to eventually ban the app on all civilian devices. And these risks surrounding personal data are very real. As recently as June 2022, TikTok employees were cited in a report saying that, quote, everything is seen in China, while one director claimed a Beijing-based engineer, referred to as master admin, has access to everything. And this is within their terms of service. When you download and sign up to TikTok, you're accepting this. You're accepting that they can see everything that you do on your phone and online, with some of the most outrageous data collection policies of any social media site.
This is from TikTok's privacy policy.
All right.
It said, we collect certain information about the device you use to access the platform, such as your IP address, user region. This is really crazy. Your screen resolution and operating system, app and file names and types. So all your apps and all your file names, all the things you have filed away on your phone.
Really?
Keystroke patterns or rhythms. So they're monitoring your keystrokes, which means they know every fucking thing you type.
Wow.
And the thing is, we've already been down this road. Donald Trump actually tried to ban TikTok in the US back in 2019, and yet he failed to get this through. The executive order was signed, but the move was actually blocked. And in 2020, Trump's administration settled for a compromise, instead forcing ByteDance to sell a measly 20% ownership stake in TikTok to an American company, with 12.5 going to the tech company Oracle and 7.5 going to department store giant Walmart. ByteDance would also have to let Oracle, quote, run cloud services and security for TikTok in the US. In response, ByteDance swiftly decided to take legal action in the form of lawsuits and filed a preliminary injunction in September 2020, which was actually approved. ByteDance used American law to further damage the American nation, and it should be telling that banning TikTok is a priority to both Democrats and Republicans. Both sides agree on this, and yet still hasn't gone through. But with the Biden administration's latest declaration of intent, the discourse has already started, and those with vested interest in simply perpetuating the discourse itself. And unfortunately, the precedent for governments successfully banning TikTok is basically non-existent. Outside of countries with strict censorship laws, only India has achieved a nationwide ban on the app. At this point for the United States and the rest of the Western world, the question becomes whether or not TikTok is already so entwined with our culture that its removal will be impossible. But it should be clear to all of you who have watched so far that TikTok is one of the greatest geopolitical weapons the world has ever seen. And thank you to Ground News for kindly sponsoring this video.